Welcome back. Our next session will feature two distinguished speakers, Dr. Judy Reaven, Professor of Psychiatry and Pediatrics, and Dr. Audrey Blakely-Smith, Associate Professor, both from the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. Together, they'll share important information about Facing Your Fears, a program they co-authored to help autistic youth manage anxiety and build coping skills. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Judy.
Thanks so much. So happy to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the opportunity to talk about our work today. We have a long list of acknowledgments, but honestly, first and foremost, it has to be to OAR. OAR kind of believed in us when it was hard to figure out who was going to believe in us at the beginning of this journey. And I'm so grateful for that early funding and opportunity. And we're going to talk a lot about kind of what it's led to over the last 20 years for both myself and for Audrey, as she talks about the adaptation of Facing Your Fears for teens with intellectual disabilities. Also wanting, of course, to acknowledge some of the other funders that we've had over the years and the families, of course, and the kids who we've worked with, and we've learned so much. We also wanted to thank our many teens and colleagues. In putting this together, the list is a very long list. So we have had the opportunity to work with great folks from all the way from our trainees, our LEND fellows, to postdocs, to interns, externs, and folks in the community. So we've really learned a lot from our research teams who've helped us with the original clinic-based Facing Your Fears, who've worked with us across the country to implement Facing Your Fears in your clinics, to our school-based teams, and again, to our research team who's worked on the adaptation for teens with intellectual disabilities. I also wanted to acknowledge that both Audrey and I do get royalties from the publication of our manuals, the original Facing Your Fears, which is here, and then the school-based program, which we're going to talk a little bit about as well. Right, so I want to take you back to the early 2000s, and that is when we first started to think about this work. So what was happening in the early 2000s? Well, there was Y2K, there were Hanging Chads, you might remember. Fairly Odd Parents was a popular cartoon that I know my kids watched. Flip phones, and when we think about autism prevalence, it was 6.7 per 1,000. So that was the landscape at that time. Let's talk a little bit about what was happening. I was a clinician. I was not doing research at this time. And here's some of the things that I noticed. I noticed that when I saw kids, the focus was on, do they have autism or not? So it was a diagnosis question. There was a lot of focus on early intervention, providing support to young kids. And at times, parents were not included in those interventions. We also know that there was little focus on kids that were much older. I was really seeing some older kids at that time in psychotherapy, and there just wasn't that much that people were focusing on. There wasn't a guide for how to support our kids at that age. Certainly at school age, adolescence, there was just very little. And then we can include individuals with intellectual disabilities, even less in terms of like a robust understanding of what to do. There was a lot of mental health presentation, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but there was not a lot of understanding about how to even diagnose. Some of our early manuals even excluded the presence of other mental health diagnoses from an autism diagnosis, so that made it hard for us to know, could something else be going on in addition to an autistic presentation. And there were, of course, long wait lists, and that's been true then, it's true now, with few kind of qualified providers to really kind of work with our community. And here's some of the presentations. So again, I was doing clinical work at the time in the early 2000s, not much research at all, but here's some of the stuff I noticed. I noticed that our kids and our parents were coming to us saying, I have a lot of fears. Some of my fears are of the dark. Some of my fears are using the bathroom in public. Some fears might be thunderstorms. Some fears could be bugs, bees, spiders, those sorts of things. And a lot of social concerns and worries, talking to other kids, and then a whole list. And I certainly don't intend this to be fully comprehensive, but this is really a sampling of what some of the concerns were that our families and kids came to me with. And they weren't just saying, I have a fear of this. They were really talking about interference. So they were really telling us these worries that either I have, if it was the child talking directly, or parents about their kids would say these behaviors are interfering in their ability to do well at school, to be at home, for our family to get into the community. So it was that kind of landscape that kind of led to this really whole cascade of research. So you can see in 2003 is when I published the first paper, a case study. And then it was 2004, and I should have really a little marker right here because that's when I wrote my first grant for OAR and received funding. So it was very early on in this trajectory of Facing Your Fears development, received the funding, and that really led to group intervention studies that we did, a randomized controlled trial. We were able to get additional funding to get the Facing Your Fears program out of our clinic here in Colorado and into the clinics across the country to see if that was something we would be able to do effectively. We then moved into a school-based adaptation, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. And then in the meantime, Audrey was looking at the adaptation for teens with intellectual disabilities. And that kind of takes us up to the future time. So we feel like we've been really busy in the last 20 years. And it also maybe reflects how long it takes to get this work out there. Okay, so I'm going to spend the next little bit talking about what is Facing Your Fears. Some of you may be aware, but others may not. So I'm going to talk about the clinic program first. It's a program for kids 8 to 14 with autism and anxiety that interferes in their life. It can be delivered in person or through telehealth. When you do the clinic-based program, it is about 14 weeks, 90 minutes each time. It's a little bit shorter if you are doing this by telehealth. We have parents and kids come each time. So this is not a drop-off experience, but we very much partner with our parents to be able to help their kids learn the strategies and help them face fears. The first 7 weeks of the 14-week program are all about what is anxiety? What does it do to your body? What does it do to your mind? How can you identify what kinds of situations make you anxious? And then we help kids learn strategies, which I'll give you some examples for in just a few minutes. But we help our kids figure out what to do to manage that uncomfortable feeling we all experience in our bodies, what to do about those thoughts that are anxious thoughts, how to bring yourself back down, so how to regulate emotions. And of course, we introduce the idea of facing fears. That's graded exposure. The second 7 weeks of the program are all about helping kids figure out what fear they want to face and have them face it in group. We do this by telehealth also. And for kids who are doing an in-person experience, they also have the opportunity to make a Facing Your Fears video. And I'll give you a little taste of what that might look like. When we first entered this in the early 2000s, continue to be CBT programs, and this is a CBT program, a cognitive behavior therapy program. There were programs for non-autistic kids that were out there. And when we took a look at some of those programs, our feeling was, well, we need to make CBT accessible for our learners. And we really felt like it was, those early programs were a little bit more abstract. And we felt like we needed something that was a little bit more concrete, a little bit more repetitive, a little more visual to make the concepts, which can be somewhat abstract, more accessible for our learners, as well as other neurodivergent learners. So incorporated a lot of written worksheets, drawing, hands-on activities, video modeling, very strengths-based, which is very important to us. So kids talk a lot about what their focused interests might be and share them with the group. And then, of course, we have a lot of parent involvement in this initial program. We really see our parents as partners to us. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste of what the core components might look like. And we're going to start with psychoeducation. So psychoeducation is the first half of Facing Your Fears. In that sort of segment, we spend a lot of time thinking about what words do you use to describe anxiety. Lots of kids have different preferences about what words they want to use. Some use fear, worry, some use upset. So we want to try to figure out what words work for our kids. We help them identify what makes them anxious. And it's going to be different for everybody, although there'll be some commonalities across our kids. We want to help them identify what's happening in their bodies. That's kind of hard to do, to figure out what is happening, and that thing, that uncomfortable feeling in your stomach could be anxiety versus just a stomach ache. This is a nice example of how we compare anxiety time versus fun time. Lots of times I get a question from folks saying, how do you get buy-in from autistic kids to kind of do this program? This is a little bit of how we do it. So we give them a series of worksheets. This is just one in a series. This particular guy is named Tyrone. We see that he worries about a number of things. He worries about homework, being late, taking tests, making mistakes. You can see that his worries are kind of moderate. They're kind of in the middle in terms of intensity. And importantly, we see that if this is like a day in the life, this circle, we can see that half of his time is spent worrying and half of his time is he can have fun. And then we ask the kids, where do you think he would be in terms of how much time he worries during the day? And most kids will say kind of in the middle sometime. So this is a little bit of a way to say, gosh, wouldn't it be great if Tyrone had more time to spend having fun and less time to worry? Like that would be really cool. So we give them other worksheets where we see somebody who worries much more than Tyrone. We see someone who worries much less than Tyrone. And then we ask them, where do you think you fall? And again, it's just getting at this idea that worry is a takeaway from your life, because it is. And so we want our kids to understand that so that it makes more sense when we try to work on it with them. Another thing that we do to try to help with motivation and interest in engaging in CBT is we externalize worry. We do that through the creation of worry bugs. So when I say externalizing worry, what I mean is we help our kids imagine what worry might look like. Some kids think it's a big monster. Some kids think it's a creature or a character they've seen on TV. Who knows? It's very individual. And we have them create it. So we're separating out the problem from the person. So the problem being worry. Okay. So in this particular example, this guy did a worry bug through Play-Doh, is also drawing, and he's calling it Storm Germo. Then we ask the kids, listen, if you could imagine something that's going to help you, what would that look like? And very early on in the development of the program, the kids were telling us they wanted helper bugs. So this was such a nice example of an activity that came from the kids themselves saying, if you're going to have us do a worry bug, you better tell us that we need a helper bug and give us one. So I thought that was such a great idea. And so now we have worry bugs, which reflect worry. And then we have helper bugs, which really reflect the strength within each of our kids to be able to manage their worry. And in this case, he calls it iPhone Pack. And then we really have this kind of concept of squashing worry. And they literally squash their Play-Doh. If they're doing a drawing, they might tear it up. But it's this idea of empowerment. And that's what we're going for, is that we want our kids to feel like they can manage their worry and empower themselves independently. It's a really big deal to be able to help our kids get there. All right, squash that worry. So if we continue with psychoeducation, we do spend some time thinking about how to help our kids bring themselves back down when they feel themselves escalated. We do that through teaching them a variety of somatic management, so figuring out what's going on in their body and what's going on in their mind. We do introduce this idea of false alarms, in that sometimes our reactive body is telling us there's danger when there is no real danger. And that's an important concept that we help our kids understand, that they don't have to necessarily react to everything their body is telling them to do. Sometimes it is a false alarm. We help manage physical reactions by doing deep breathing, relaxation, many things I'm sure you all do out there. There's so many options of ways to help any one of us calm down, and we certainly want our kids to take advantage of those things. We do pay attention to your mind. So what it is that you're telling yourself. We call it active minds, helpful thoughts. Some people call them negative automatic thoughts. I'll show you some examples of how we address it here in just a sec. And then all of this kind of comes together in ways to manage our emotions. We all have to do this. This isn't just our kids, but every single one of us on this call have had to find a way to manage our own emotions, especially when stressed or upset. So again, calming the body, managing the mind, and the language we use is plan to get to green. So I'll show you what we mean by that. So here's an example of a worksheet that we have. And this is from our school-based program. So the example is Maria's active mind. We're saying Maria's got to go to class. She sees a group of kids standing around, and she has a lot of thoughts. These thoughts are things like, uh-oh, everyone's looking at me. I'm starting to feel sick. I got to get out of here. They notice I'm shaking. I never say the right thing around people, and so on. And we ask our kids, do you think thinking these thoughts will make her feel better or worse? And I'm thinking to you, you all are answering this question. They are saying worse. Okay. So then we say, well, we have to help Maria. What would be a more helpful thing to say? And then we say, encourage them, and we give them some choices about things that she could say to herself instead. But it could be things like, I bet they don't notice that my hands are shaking, or they're probably laughing about something else that happened, or I won't know if they'll say hi back unless I try, things like that. And then we say to the kids, do you think thinking these thoughts will make Maria feel better or worse? And most of the time our kids say better. So we're really just introducing this idea of what it is that any one of us tell ourselves and how our thoughts can make us more miserable, honestly, which is kind of a core piece of CBT. Here's an example of our plan to get to green so that you can see we use a stoplight system. Lots of other measurement emotion reg programs are out there. This is just what we happen to land on. We call it a stressometer. The left-hand column, what I can do when I'm in red, are just some strategies that our kids think about for themselves, what they think they'll try when they find themselves really upset and escalated, and what they want to try to bring themselves back down. The right-hand column is what my parent or teacher can do or say when I'm in red. And that's a really important addition, I think, because some of our kids and parents and teachers haven't had that conversation about what they're going to do when our students or kids are escalated. But it's kind of a nice opportunity for our kids to say, here's what helps me. I need you to give me 5 minutes. Don't talk to me, but just give me 5 minutes and I'll check back. Some kids might say, don't leave me alone, stay with me. Some kids might say, I need you to leave me alone. So it's going to vary for each person, but at least it gives an opportunity to have the conversation get started in terms of how our kids and parents and adults and around them are going to kind of talk together about what happens when they get upset. And the other part is that we all get upset. I bet you all could put your own plan to get to green up there. You know what you do for yourself when you get to red or yellow or green. Our kids are just the same, but they just don't have a natural strategy for how to bring themselves back down. So this is really just trying to help them figure out what works for them. Okay, so that's all psychoeducation, really the whole first half of the program. And then we introduce facing fears. Now, most kids already know that they're going to have to do that because this program is called Facing Your Fears, but this is when they actually have to try to do it. So we use videos to try to teach it so that they know what we're talking about. I'm going to show you a video in just a second, actually just a snippet of a video from our school-based program. This one is Facing Your Fears of Making Mistakes. So you'll see in this video a narrator, a fear facer, so that's the person who's facing their fears, and a coach. And the idea here is that those are the 4 steps. There could be an infinite number of steps, but our videos are really just like 4 steps where we see kids actually making mistakes in this particular scenario, making mistakes on purpose. And we do that because if you're afraid of making mistakes, you have to do the thing that you're afraid of, which is make mistakes. If you're afraid of the dark, you have to do the thing that you're afraid of, which would be go into a dark space. If you're afraid of dogs, you have to do the thing you're afraid of, which is be with dogs. So I could go on and on, but I think you get the idea. I want you to notice the last step here, which is facing your fears of making mistakes, which is turning in an assignment and waiting to hear whether you made any mistakes. So really introducing this idea of uncertainty, like, I don't know if I made a mistake or not. So let's just see how it looks so that you can get a feel for what the kids see. So I think we're ready, Cody, to watch that little snippet of video.
Now, Arden's final step is to hand in her work to the teacher. She has to wait several days to get feedback on her work.
Now it's time for my final step. I'm going to hand in my project. My teacher told us yesterday that she might not have enough time to review our work today, but this was a big project and I really want to know if I got everything right.
Remind yourself, be patient. It's okay not to know right away. Even if you did make some mistakes, your teacher will help you figure out what to do. Take a deep breath.
Yeah, I need to be okay not knowing if I made a mistake. I'll take a deep breath.
Okay, guys, I need your book reports, please. Thanks. I'll hand these back at the end of the week.
Okay, thanks. It's gonna be hard not knowing if I did a good job, but I can wait.
Great. I'm sure you did your best.
I did it. I handed in my project. I'm still a little nervous about how I did, but I can deal with it.
Great job.
Now, all of you have a plan for how to face your fears of making mistakes. We'll see you next time, another episode of Facing Your Fears.
Excellent. So these are really fun videos to make with our kids and fun videos to show. You can see that our coach is really helping our kids internalize some strategies of how they can face a fear, how important it is, how they're proud of themselves, those sorts of things. That's what we want our kids to think, that it's okay to face a fear, that it may not be easy, it may be hard, but that they can do it. And that's the important piece here. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a snippet. All right, let's keep going. All right, let's talk about parents for a minute. Some of you all may be parents. As I said, our parents are partners in this, especially in our clinic-based programs. What do we do with our parent component? Well, we promote support. And honestly, many of our families love seeing other families who have kids who have similar challenges or differences, and they feel very supported by each other. We talk a lot about psychoed, just like I did with you all. So we talk about what anxiety is, what their triggers might be. We talk about strategies for how to manage their anxiety, whether it's their body or their mind. We introduce the idea of graded exposure, and our families help us think through with their kids what fears they want to start with, what fears they can face. We also encourage our families to model their own brave behavior. Lots of families maybe are private and it hasn't occurred to them to say out loud, I'm feeling nervous. Here's what I'm going to do to try to manage my anxiety. But we do talk about that it's important for our kids to see the adults around them facing fears. We want them to encourage brave behavior in their own kids. So when you see your kids being brave, it's like, wow, that was so brave, so cool. And just even using that talk is really important to do. And then we directly talk about parental anxiety and parenting style. And we just attack it head on. We all experience anxiety, and there's certainly some evidence that anxiety runs in families, and it's just real. And it's we just want to talk through it and how we can all get a handle on what's going on with our own anxiety and how that influences how we want to parent. Okay, so let me just show you a little bit about the kind of research that we've done. And I know there's been a handout here that Audrey and I put together about the evidence for facing your fears. You can totally read more about it. But essentially what we did was created the program and then started to test it out. So we did it through a pilot study. This was the one that was originally funded by OAR, was able to move into a randomized controlled trial, and then eventually deliver this intervention to trainings to clinicians across the country to see how good a job they would do at delivering our interventions, so really getting it out of our clinic into the hands of other folks, and to see if they could get good results. So really with an eye towards dissemination initially, but doing implementation work to try to get there. The results are all consistent in that kids significantly showed improvements in their anxiety according to parent report, and in many cases according to self-report. So feeling really encouraged by this research. We're also encouraged by the interest and enthusiasm of clinics across North America. And I say North America because Canada has been such an important partner and player with us in terms of all the work that they've done and interest that they've had in trying to deliver Facing Your Fears. So I've just got a couple examples of papers from clinics in, I think all of these are actually Canadian. So our colleagues Carly McMorris in this paper, and the last paper is in Alberta, Canada, and then Abby Solish is in Toronto at Sick Kids Hospital, and they've all done a lot of work at figuring out how to do Facing Your Fears in their setting. So really happy that there's been some enthusiasm across other clinics. So working really hard to get the program in clinic settings, but then realizing the limitations of doing a clinic-based program only. So that you all probably know, and I'm going to go to my next slide here, you all probably know that not everybody can get to a clinic. Families can't always get there. There are employment issues. You can't get off work. You've got other kids to take care of. And then we started to think about, well, maybe we could deliver this or do something in schools, and really felt like, let's entertain this idea. So what we noticed is that autistic students display their anxiety at school. And we noticed that when we were working in clinics too, because when we talk about fears, our kids would often say, I'm having trouble talking to my teacher. I'm having trouble doing a presentation at school. I'm having trouble with the fire alarm at school. I'm having trouble, and we're like, oh man, what if we could get into the very setting where the anxiety was showing up? Maybe we could be more effective. The other piece here is that at the time, and I think this is still true, is that most CBT programs are in university clinics and not elsewhere. And that many of the kids we were interested in working with can access care only in schools. So schools seem to us to be like, this is where we need to be. So I was fortunate enough to be able to work with the Ministry of Education in Singapore. And I want to call out my two colleagues here. One is Mariam Al-Janed, a psychologist at the Ministry of Education. And then my other colleague, a Canadian friend of mine and former trainee, Irene Dermick, both psychologists, and she's at Toronto. And we all partnered together to try to do an adaptation of Facing Your Fears, something created in Colorado for a Singaporean audience, and importantly, to be delivered by non-mental health providers. They said our schools are staffed with educators. They'll have consultation by psychologists, but we are going to have this program delivered by educators. So that's a big leap for us. And we had to really think, is that something we could even do? But we took data, and as it turns out, they were able to deliver this to 22 different secondary schools. We trained 42 folks, and this was a slightly older group, so 13 to 15. And again, we saw significant improvements in anxiety according to both self-report and parent report. So we were super encouraged. And that really led to, well, let's do it in Colorado. What can we do? What will it look like? And this is just a little bit of an overview of what our Facing Your Fears program looks like now. It's been through a lot of iterations, but this is essentially what our manual is about. 12 sessions. The first half, if you look closely, are sessions all about psychoeducation, kind of what I reviewed before, which is time spent worrying, worry bugs, false alarms, those sorts of things. And then the last half is all about exposure. You still have to face fears, even in schools. So we do talk with our school teams about how to conduct exposures during a school day, during math class, at recess, when there could be a fire alarm, those sorts of things. Importantly, a couple of differences. One is you'll notice there's 2 parent sessions or 2 parent contacts, far reduced from our clinic-based program. It is also a much shorter program. You can see that it's 12 lessons, 40 minutes each time. Remembering our clinic-based program was 14 weeks, 90 minutes each time. And then a third difference is that this is a program delivered by mental health and non-mental health educators. That's really important to us. If we're going to address the mental health crisis, we need to be, all hands on deck, which is everybody gets a role to play. And it means our SLPs, so our speech language pathologists, our OTs, our special educators are all part of our team to try to address the anxiety in our kids that can be so interfering at school. Again, have had the opportunity to study this particular program and are looking at the results. And I'll tell you my newest study here in just a quick second, but this was a study that was funded by HRSA. That was a train the trainer approach where we trained school providers, both mental health, non-mental health, to do this intervention. They delivered it at school, and we got some really nice results, again, where we had our students demonstrate significant reductions in anxiety. And parents also noticed the reductions, which is also really nice to be able to see. And more work to be done in this area for sure. Let me also just give you a sense about the overall impact and reach of facing your fears. Again, such a debt of gratitude to OAR for being able to help fund that early work. But here's where we are so far in terms of the impact. Conducted over 70 trainings, locally, regionally, nationally, 42 international trainings. And there's been a lot of interest in international clinics and schools who really want to do this work. I mentioned Singapore, Ireland, Argentina, Kuwait, and lots of Canadian provinces. Have dozens of posters, presentations, 30 peer-reviewed publications, and more on the way. In addition to the OAR funding, it's really led to other external funding, Autism Speaks, HRSA, NIH, Department of Defense, and a current PCORI, which I have right now. And then the 2 published programs, the clinic-based program and our school-based program, with Audrey's adaptation on the way. So let me just show one more quick slide before I pass it over, and that is where we are right now in terms of our research. So I mentioned the PCORI grant that I have. It is comparing zones of regulation to facing your fears in schools. And we're in Colorado schools as well as North Carolina schools. And the whole point of this grant is to be able to understand which students do better under which program, and to support our schools in making these decisions. It's hard to know what to do when they might have students who have autism and anxiety, and we're hoping the results of this study is really going to help them figure that out. So I'm just going to turn it to the next slide, which is Audrey's turn, and I'll stay on for questions.
Thanks so much, Judy. Cody, if you don't mind, I just need to thank you, take control of the remote. Thank you so much. As Judy shared, our primary goal has been to really think carefully about the mental health needs of autistic youth. And when we think about who is potentially being missed by traditional mental health care, immediately youth with intellectual developmental disabilities come to mind. There are so many barriers to mental health care for this population that we really want to take stock of what some of these challenges are so that we can carefully address them. So a huge challenge that can make the assessment of mental health conditions difficult is the lack of standardized assessments. It can be difficult to parse out what might be a byproduct of challenging behavior, avoidance, maybe protest behavior, and what may be a byproduct of a mental health condition such as anxiety when there aren't a ton of standardized assessments. We know as well that there are high rates of unmet mental health needs in youth with IDD. We see high rates of anxiety in autistic teens with intellectual disabilities relative to those with ID alone. Yet the support that we have available is significantly reduced. And the service cliff that takes place post high school is particularly alarming and challenging for youth with intellectual and developmental differences, in part because it is a critical time of life, a pivotal time to be entering the workforce, a key social determinant of health for all people, particularly those for IDD. And a major barrier to access to transition supports has been anxiety. Not being able to manage one's own body, one's mind, as we face challenges tied to new programming, a change in support providers, from the security of high school to a new transition program, can lead to avoidance and unmet needs. So we really want to think carefully about ways to intervene early for youth with IDD, particularly tied to anxiety. We also were faced with challenges on a larger scope, not just based on assessment instruments, educational context, but as a field, as a nation, as a society, there's tons of biases against individuals with IDD that has been present even in the research. Some research through a UK research team has indicated that only 6% of autistic participants in research studies have IDD. This prevents their voices from being heard, their perspective being heard, and evidence-based research being really pioneered in this population. And we're really trying to change that a little bit at a time. I'm not able to move on to my next slide. If you could do that, sorry.
It should still be engaged. Go ahead and try clicking through one more time. Or I'll advance after the first one, but try.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me know if it persists, though. I'll re-engage.
Okay, appreciate your support. And what we do know about anxiety research in populations of youth with IDD is that behavioral approaches have a very strong history of success. And that is thrilling and exciting, yet concerning that these approaches have not necessarily been harnessed effectively in manualized interventions. And a key barrier for families accessing care is lack of manualized interventions. So while we know behavioral approaches can be very effective, due to lack of manualization, community-based clinicians are not always equipped with strategies to be able to walk right in and support youth with IDD. Many families, as a result, rely on their primary care physicians. They are reliant on primary care physicians for support due to lack of availability of other folks who have the expertise to support their youth. And as a result, we see very high rates of medication use, in part because of the medical complexity, but also in part because of lack of other options. So much so that back in 2018, the UK, the Royal College of Psychiatry, created a sub-work group called STAMP, Supporting Treatment and Appropriate Medication Use in Pediatrics, out of concern and alarm due to over-medication and pharmacological side effects on youth. More medications are frequently added without taking into account other alternative ways to manage symptoms, such as psychotherapeutic techniques. Cody, I'm going to call you in again. So sorry. I don't think I have access to be able to move it. If you want, oh, I got remote control access.
Try now.
So
oh, okay. No.
Thank you. Okay, so where are we? As Judy shared, we have been so thankful to the Organization for Autism Research for jumpstarting our research. We could not have done this without OAR support. And back in 2016, we were in the heart of looking at the effectiveness of the original Facing Your Fear program in clinics across the nation. And we reflected ourselves, who are we missing? We're missing youth with IDD. And at that time in 2016, we were very fortunate to receive a pilot study grant from OAR, and we were able to pilot and conduct focus groups with families, with clinicians, to really elicit feedback on our curriculum. What could we change? How could we adapt this program to best meet the youth, the needs of youth with IDD? Through a 2-year study we conducted, we saw 23 families with teens between the age of 12 and 18 with autism, with intellectual disabilities, communication differences, and we worked hard to create a manualized intervention that was tailored to the unique communication needs of this population. We have some youth with fluent communication. We have some youth with single words, augmentative communication devices, and we wanted to really best meet their needs. Through this research and the positive outcomes that we saw within this pilot study, we were then positioned in a better place to be able to apply for funding through other agencies to conduct a larger trial. And in 2018, we were able to receive funding through the Department of Defense and begin a 3-year study, randomized clinical trial, looking at the effectiveness of the adapted version of Facing Your Fears for teens with IDD relative to treatment as usual. And what we saw were significant reductions of anxiety in their primary anxiety presentation. In addition, this is what we were thrilled about. We saw changes in emotion regulation, improvements in emotion regulation, improvements in dysregulation, and improvements in challenging behaviors, which often stand in the way of teens being able to access appropriate medical supports, educational supports, transition supports. So right now we are conducting a small implementation study of FYF-IDD to move the research protocol into clinics with the ultimate goal of increasing access to mental health care, expanding access to evidence-based approaches so that our families of youth with IDD have options, have choices. It's really important to be able to rely on options and choices beyond just medication use. We published the study, the pilot study, funded by OAR in 2021. And as I shared, we then moved on to conduct a larger trial. As you see here, this is a brief overview of what the adapted curriculum looks like. Similar to the original Facing Your Fear program, we have 14 weeks. A little bit different though than the traditional curriculum. We front-loaded caregiver education in the beginning. So 3 sessions primarily focused on caregiver psychoeducation, preparing how to individualize content to the unique communication needs of each teen. And then we brought teens in for in-person sessions, focused on building communication tied to identifying their own affect, identifying causes of anxiety, how their body reacts to anxiety, and building those somatic management skills. We then move into exposure at session 8, and you'll see those initial first 3 sessions in session 8 are caregiver only Zoom sessions, sessions 4 through 7, 9 through 14, in-person, teen, and caregiver. A little bit different because caregivers participate in all sessions. And the reason we did that was because of the diverse communication abilities of this population. We really wanted to rely upon caregivers to support us and to support their teens to effectively engage in intervention. And beyond just the scope of the intervention, we wanted caregiver support in generalizing strategies outside of the clinic. As we think about the profile of anxiety disorders in autistic teens with IDD, we're seeing symptoms across the board that we also see in general non-autistic populations. What's a little bit different though, and what I do want to emphasize is the presence of some fears such as phobias, separation anxiety tend to persist in teens with longer than they persist in non-autistic populations. So phobias, for example, separation anxiety often fade out in middle childhood, but we see these symptoms persisting in autistic youth with IDD, which is really important to identify because we want to target these and support autonomous um, implementation of skills and ability to be brave in a range of situations. We also see social worries persist, generalized anxiety, and lots of fear of change. As we think about the needs of the IDD population, we're also thinking carefully about ways in which to support strategies and skill building through activity-based learning and being able to really think carefully about somatic management strategies. Sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit too soon. But when we're thinking about strategies to calm the body, we're thinking not only about ways in which we can support deep breathing, but create visual schedules and routines tied to a range of somatic management so that youth who may not have the communication abilities to understand some forms of management approaches can have options tied to what strategies to rely upon. We also try and think carefully about the way thoughts impact emotional experiences. And instead of targeting negative cognitions, we instead create positive mantras and helpful thoughts to pave the way for bravery. So here we are highlighting that perseverative negative thoughts can often be very clear to identify and a good barometer of an individual stress level. They can then be replaced with more helpful thinking. And we do feel like this is a critical component as well. It paves the way for bravery. The heart of change is exposure. And so being able to introduce somatic management and helpful thoughts before engaging in exposure is really critical because sometimes motivation for change may be. This is an example of a visual guide of a visual menu, essentially, of helpful thoughts. We use lots of videos, lots of practice opportunities, and then we create the framework by which bravery is introduced, exposure is introduced, calming our body, calming our mind, exposure, being brave, and then natural rewards are in place. And having a structure by which teams are able to use and predict each session, what will take place, can be anxiety reducing in and of itself. As we really think about the IDD program, what we are most thrilled about is the benefit that our teens have evidenced. And as I shared, our initial pilot study really paved the way for that larger randomized clinical trial. And our results have indicated that not only do teens with IDD benefit from CBT approaches, but those benefits are not just on isolated symptoms of anxiety. They really are expanded to really impact change in a teen's ability to regulate their emotions. So we saw reductions in dysregulation, improvement in mood. We also saw reductions in challenging behavior that can really stand in the way of youth being able to be engaged in our communities. So we do want to emphasize final thoughts, critical to expand mental health intervention. It's a public health need, it's important, and we know that teens and families benefit. We know that exposure ultimately might be the heart of change for people with IDD, just as it is for those without. And we also know that autistic teens with IDD are able to make use of somatic management and helpful thoughts. The truth of the matter is when we pulled out the data and looked carefully at who benefits from this approach, those with single word speech, nonverbal abilities also benefited significantly from the treatment. It was not just a benefit for those who were fluent communicators. And ultimately, as I shared earlier, our goal is to increase access to healthcare. To do so, it is critical to have manualized interventions that clinicians are able to pick up in the community and implement. And so we are very thankful for the support that OAR has provided to us to begin that process and to expand access of care. Oops, I went too far, but I wanted to, at the end here, why does this matter? This matters because ultimately families are able to do things that their teens want to do. Anxiety diminishes opportunities, and what really matters for families is being able to engage in the goals and values that they hold true. That may be being able to use the bathroom in public. It might be attending class even when you're late. It might be accessing medical care. We all deserve dental and medical care, and anxiety can really stand in the way of basic access to medical care. And we know, as I shared earlier, that symptoms of phobias and separation anxiety persist in this population. And so being able to separate from your parents to attend transitional supports, educational supports is really key. Handing in your homework, even when you make a mistake, is really important. And so we are thankful that we have been able to see change and take part in the lives of families to activate change. And with that, I'm going to conclude and see if we have questions. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, and thank you both for sharing your valuable insights on such an important topic. And indeed, we'll go ahead and move into the questions portion. As a reminder to our guests, you can still submit questions through the questions pane of your control panel. So let's get started. The first question we had come in is, will my child catch these fears or possibly be influenced by other kids in groups?
Yeah, maybe I'll say a word, Audrey, and see if you want to add to it. I think this was a question that came up in our earlier studies when we were first doing group interventions, and families were worried about that. And I think at the time, we probably weren't sure how to answer it because it was newer to us. But I have to say now, after being involved in just a lot of different intervention studies, both with conducting ourselves as well as colleagues of ours, this comes up so rarely. I could probably count on one hand the number of times families have said, I don't know, my child seems to be imitating another child in group. What should I do? It's just so rare that that it's not really an issue. I don't know, Audrey, if you'd say anything about in the IDD group. You ever see that?
Yeah, it's unusual. Parents may be concerned about behavior because behavior may be manifesting as a result of anxiety, untreated anxiety symptoms, but it has been unusual for us to see other kids pick up behavioral challenges in the context of groups.
Wonderful, thank you. Combination of questions here. Could this program help out with adults, or is there therapy for adults and social anxiety that you'd recommend, particularly in context of employment settings?
Absolutely, CBT can help with adults, absolutely. And we have used this curriculum, both the Facing Your Fear curriculum and the IDD curriculum individually with folks. The core tenets are powerful and are used in non-autistic populations. And when it comes time to be thinking about employment, absolutely, we're trying to think about opportunities to showcase bravery, and there's no better place to do that than in employment settings. Having said that, we're really trying to think carefully about our present curriculum is not really created for adults. There's lots of visuals, and I think the visuals can be helpful, but some adults might find some of the visuals to be more suitable for younger age groups. And so when we're thinking about the use of CBT for adults, we're thinking about building strategies to manage your body, manage negative thoughts and have more helpful thinking, and then taking steps a little bit at a time. And ultimately, being able to do so with support of others is really key. It's not just thinking about ways to manage your own experience, it's also critical to think about ways in which your skill set can be accommodated. So we never want to rely only on CBT approaches. We also want to think carefully about environmental and contextual fit. How can we really amplify individual strengths in settings? And how can we arrange the environment and support others to best support adults?
Wonderful, thank you. The next we have is, how would you implement the program with nonverbal autistics?
We had a number of nonverbal autistic teens in the Facing Your Fear IDD group, and the activities are hands-on activities, and we really emphasize the importance of the hands-on activities as opposed to the telehealth medium. We were conducting this program right after COVID, and there was this desire to be able to do telehealth, but we really felt so strongly that that would exclude our youth who are nonverbal. And so we really created activities so that they would be able to access content. And as I shared earlier, the results, our initial findings are indicating that those youth did as well as those with fluent communication within the program. Because when you're thinking about the core components of managing your body, that can be taught through modeling, it can be taught through visuals, it can be taught through practice. Helpful thoughts may not be able to be verbalized by that individual, but it changes the climate to a positive affirming climate as opposed to avoid. It changes the pathway by which we approach overcoming obstacles, and exposure can be completed by anybody, irrespective of communication level.
Hey, Audrey, let me add just a couple quick things. So I think there were for folks that were minimally speaking, we use a lot of visual support so they could really take hold of pictures and words. Not everybody, but many could, in terms of turning it into like sorting tasks. So to Audrey's point of having tasks that were at their ability level, I think that helped a lot. And it's also true that there were a number of folks that were minimally speaking who were readers, and we were able to access their literacy skills to be able to promote communication, but also explain sort of next steps around exposure and those sorts of things. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Here's a great question for you. What if there isn't anyone in my area trained in facing your fears? What should they do?
So kind of what we've thought about, and it might be slightly different, Audrey, how you've thought about it for the ID adaptation, but for the clinic-based program, what we've typically said is for families to see what is available. By and large, there probably are CBT programs in their community. If they really have no one who has experience at working with autistic youth, then sometimes what we've recommended is to be able to work with the providers who are really good CBTers, so know a lot about CBT, and to maybe partner with a professional who has good experience in working with autistic kids to be able to get some consultation. So that certainly can work. Yeah, that's probably the best that we have, is to kind of leverage the expertise in the community and partner with folks that maybe don't have knowledge about both autism and CBT, but maybe one or the other, and then partner together.
And for those youth with IDD, our ABA providers are so skilled at task analysis that it really does come naturally to be able to create exposure hierarchies. We really are emphasizing, though, the importance of some of the psychoeducational activities, such as managing the body, managing the mind prior to some of the exposure, just to make those exposure activities a little bit easier to complete. But within our own research, we had not only parents come to group, but we had several families who brought their own ABA providers, and their ABA providers were really great at jumping in and being able to translate some of the mental health components into the daily practice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then I think we'll wrap with the last question here. And a comment, of course, here. They say that this is amazing work and they thank you so much for all you're doing. They're asking, are you looking at a similar program for younger elementary autistic students with IDD, or can this program be used with that age group also? And has your work dealt with school refusal at the elementary level? They've seen an uptick in this since the pandemic, and thank you again.
Yeah, I'll say one thing about the school piece is, yes, we have had kids where there's been school refusal and separation. That has been a common difficulty that the program has addressed. In terms of younger kids in schools with ID, certainly, what else I'll say one things, I know that there's some other programs that are preschool oriented that have also included kids with ID. One is a colleague who I believe has had OAR funding as well. I hope I'm not remembering that, but her name is Amy Kiefer, and she's at Kennedy Krieger, and the name of her preschool program is called Dino. There's a lot of family involvement, but also preschoolers with and without ID, but all with autism. So I can tell you that's not school-based, it's clinic-based, but at least for me, I'm such a big believer in schools now that I feel like it seems like it's a natural extension of something that we could certainly offer, because our schools have been eager to implement. So Audrey, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, the manual that we've developed, the adaptation for youth with IDD, absolutely could be used with younger populations. We just haven't done that yet. The reason we targeted the teen age group was in part because of the import of really trying to teach these skills to increase access to supports prior to transition age. And so that's why we selected that age group. But Judy and I and others have both implemented the program effectively with younger kids, for sure.
All right, wonderful. I think that's all that we have time for in terms of questions. So I just want to thank you very much again, Dr. Blakely Smith and Dr. Reven. We truly appreciate you both being here with us today.